That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The wind cut through the Hereford barracks like a sharpened bayonet, carrying the faint scent of damp earth from the Wye River Valley. Dawn had barely broken, painting the sky in muted greys over the Special Air Service training grounds. Colonel Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the assembly area, her boots planted firmly on the gravel-strewn parade square. At 42, she was a figure of unyielding precision. Her uniform pressed to razor edges, beret angled just so, the faint lines around her eyes speaking to years of operations in shadowed corners of the world. She commanded the 22nd SAS Regiment from this very base, a role few outside the regiment knew the full weight of. To her troops, she was simply the colonel, a voice that could steady a squad in the chaos of a night raid or dismantle a briefing with surgical critique. The morning's drill was standard, a joint exercise with a detachment from the regular infantry, testing integration protocols. Rows of soldiers formed up under the floodlights, their breath visible in the chill air. Rifles slung at precise angles, they stood at ease but alert, the crunch of gravel under shifting feet the only sound beyond the distant hum of a generator. Vasquez's executive officer, Major Harlan Reed, flanked her, clipboard in hand, his face a mask of focused efficiency. "All units accounted for, Marmin," he murmured, voice low against the wind. She nodded once, her gaze sweeping the lines. Discipline was the regiment's foundation. Lapses here echoed through every deployment. At the front, Sergeant Liam Kerrigan barked orders to his platoon, younger recruits from the Mercian Regiment, on rotation to learn from the SAS's edge. Kerrigan was broad-shouldered, his face weathered from patrols in Helmand, but today his temper simmered beneath the surface. A late-night card game had left him short on sleep, and the SAS's reputation grated on him like sand in a rifle barrel. "Eyes front, helmets aligned," he snapped, pacing the line. The recruits straightened, but one lagged, a private named Ellis fumbling with his gear. Kerrigan's frustration boiled over. He grabbed Ellis by the collar, yanking him into position with a grunt. "Move like you mean it, or you'll be scrubbing latrines till kingdom come." Vasquez observed from her vantage, noting the sergeant's heavy hand. It wasn't uncommon in joint trainings. The infantry's blunt style clashed with the SAS's calculated restraint. But she said nothing yet. Protocol demanded she let the chain play out, unless it crossed into abuse. Reed leaned in. "Kerrigan's pushing them hard, ma'am. Could use a reminder on escalation." She held up a gloved hand, silencing him. Her own history taught patience. Orphaned young in Manchester, she'd risen through the ranks on merit alone, enduring whispers about her gender in a world of ironclad traditions. Now, as commander, she enforced those traditions while quietly reshaping them, mentoring female officers, integrating K9 units into urban ops, proving loyalty wasn't forged in shouts but in silent trust. The drill shifted to equipment checks. Soldiers knelt in pairs, inspecting webbing and radios, the metallic click of buckles punctuating the air. Vasquez moved forward with Reed, her steps measured, boots echoing softly on the concrete apron. She paused near Kerrigan's group, where a female lance corporal, petty officer Lena Hargrove on exchange from the SBS, adjusted her harness. Hargrove was competent, her movements fluid despite the wind tugging at her ponytail. Vasquez had reviewed her file, top marks in dive quals, a steady hand in high-stress sims. As the colonel passed, she offered a nod of approval, a rare gesture that carried weight. Kerrigan, spotting the exchange, misinterpreted it. To him, the SAS was a clique of elites, and this woman, unfamiliar in the mix, seemed out of place. "Oi, how, sir?" he growled at Hargrove, striding over without breaking stride. "Hair's a liability in the field. Tie it proper or cut it." His hand shot out, not to assist, but to seize her ponytail in a rough pull, yanking it back to demonstrate the point. Hargrove winced, her jaw tightening, but she held formation, eyes forward. The line rippled with suppressed murmurs. A few infantry lads smirked, while SAS troopers stiffened imperceptibly. Vasquez halted mid-step, the scene unfolding like a frame frozen in time. The wind whispered through the tents nearby, carrying the low whine of a sentry dog on patrol. Rex, a Belgian Malinois from the K9 detachment, his handler murmuring commands to keep him healed. She felt the heat rise in her chest, not rage, but the cold calculus of command. Kerrigan straightened, oblivious, barking at Hargrove. "See, that's how it's done, no excuses." He turned, finally registering the colonel's presence, but his eyes narrowed in dismissal, mistaking her for another officer, perhaps a liaison, not the one who held the regiment's leash. "Stand down, Sergeant," Vasquez said, her voice level. Carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd stared down warlords in Kabul, the words sliced through the morning haze, drawing every eye. Kerrigan blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Ma'am." He stepped back, but the damage lingered, Hargrove rubbing her scalp subtly, the platoon frozen in uneasy silence. Reed tensed beside Vasquez, radio static crackling faintly from his earpiece, as if the base itself held its breath. In that moment, the routine fractured. Vasquez's mind raced through protocols, report the incident, log it for the chain, but deeper, the moral fault line cracked open. Obedience to rank was sacrosanct, yet this casual violation, manhandling a subordinate in plain view, struck at the core of institutional trust. She'd seen it before, the subtle erosions that turned disciplined units into fractured ones. Kerrigan, still unaware of her full stature, puffed his chest. "Just correcting a recruit, ma'am. Standards." She met his gaze, unblinking, the weight of Hereford's secrets behind her eyes, the classified briefs in her office, the ghosts of ops that demanded unflinching integrity. "Standards begin with respect, Sergeant. Yours appear misplaced." The words hung, the assembly area thick with tension. Rex whined softly from afar, sensing the shift, his ears pricked as if the dog alone understood the unspoken defiance brewing. Vasquez turned slightly, signaling Reed to note the time and witnesses. This wasn't just a pulled hair, it was a test of command, of conscience, and of the fragile order that bound them all. As the drill resumed under strained commands, Vasquez walked on, her posture unbroken. But inside, the decision formed. Silence wasn't an option. The regiment's legacy demanded more, quiet reform, born from standing firm. Little did Kerrigan know the woman he'd dismissed commanded not just this base, but the shadows where true loyalty was forged. The morning light strengthened, casting long shadows across the square, and with it the first ripples of reckoning began to spread. The assembly area hummed with restrained energy as the drill instructors called the platoons to movement. Boots scraped against gravel in synchronized rhythm, the faint clink of canteens and the rustle of ponchos marking the shift to obstacle navigation. Colonel Vasquez resumed her circuit, her gloved hands clasped behind her back, but her focus lingered on Kerrigan's platoon, like a scope zeroed on a distant target. Major Reed matched her pace, his voice a low murmur into the radio mic, clipped to his shoulder. "Log the time, 0615, incident noted for after-action review." The static hissed back acknowledgement, a thread of the base's invisible web tightening. Hargrove fell into step with her section, her expression schooled to neutrality, though Vasquez caught the subtle roll of her shoulders, a release of tension from the sergeant's grip. The lance corporal's ponytail, now hastily retied, hung neatly, but the red mark at her scalp peeked through the strands, a silent accusation. Vasquez had trained alongside women like her in the early days of integration, resilient, overlooked until the moment of crisis. Hargrove's file flashed in her mind. SBS diver, qualified in close-quarters battle, her calm under fire earning quiet respect from the SAS cadre. This wasn't the first time protocol bent under old habits, but Vasquez's command philosophy demanded precision in all things, including dignity. Kerrigan, undeterred, drove his group forward to the low crawl barrier, a stretch of mud-slicked netting under razor wire. "Down and dirty, lads! Move like you've got enemy fire on your six!" His voice boomed, echoing off the concrete bunkers that ringed the training ground. The recruits dropped prone, elbows churning through the cold muck, their grunts muffled by the wind. Kerrigan paced the line, his boots splashing in puddles, occasionally prodding a laggard with the toe of his issue. To him, this was shaping raw material, infantry grit forged in discomfort. But as Hargrove navigated the wire, her form impeccable despite the pull of fatigue, he circled back, his earlier irritation festering. "Pick it up, Corporal," he snarled, looming over her. "That hair's still flapping like a bloody flag. Standards, remember?" Without warning, his hand darted out again, fingers snagging the tie at the base of her ponytail. He tugged sharply, not enough to unseat her, but sufficient to jerk her head back mid-crawl, mud splattering her cheek. Hargrove's arms faltered for a split second, her breath catching, but she powered through, emerging on the other side with dirt-streaked fatigues and eyes like flint. The platoon behind her hesitated, a ripple of unease passing through the ranks, whispers stifled under Kerrigan's glare. Vasquez, now midway across the square, turned at the sound. The distance was 30 meters, but the scene etched itself clear. Kerrigan's posture aggressive, Hargrove rising with controlled grace. Reed's hand went to his radio again. "Ma'am, that's escalation." She nodded curtly, altering course toward the obstacle. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp tang of wet earth and cordite residue from yesterday's live fire range. In the periphery, Rex's handler, a wiry SAS corporal named Tate, led the K9 along the perimeter fence. The Malinois' nose twitched, ears forward, as if attuned to the undercurrent of discord. Dogs like Rex didn't judge rank. They sensed intent, loyalty's raw edge. By the time Vasquez reached the barrier, Kerrigan had moved on, barking at the next man. She positioned herself at the end point, arms folded, her presence a quiet anchor. Hargrove approached, snapping to attention at the finish. "Report, Lance Corporal," Vasquez said, her tone even, eyes scanning for injury. Hargrove saluted crisply, the motion fluid despite the subtle wince as her arm rose. "Obstacle cleared, ma'am. All gear intact." No complaint, no elaboration. Discipline held her words, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed the strain. Vasquez's gaze flicked to the mark on her scalp, then back to her face. "Noted. Carry on." As Hargrove double-timed to rejoin her section, Vasquez turned to Reed. "Pull Kerrigan after this rotation. Debrief in my office." Reed affirmed with a nod, keying his radio to relay the order. The Major's loyalty was steadfast, honed from years as her XO, anticipating needs without fanfare. But even he sensed the deeper fracture. Joint exercises were meant to build unity, not expose fault lines in the chain of command. The drill pressed on, transitioning to team maneuvers across a simulated urban breach, plywood mock-ups of buildings, strewn with debris to mimic a contested street. Kerrigan's platoon integrated with an SAS fire team, the contrast stark, the infantry's volume clashing with the regiment's precision. Vasquez observed from the observation post a raised platform with binoculars trained on the action. Through the lenses, she watched Kerrigan assign positions, his voice carrying over the radio net. "Hargrove, you're on rear security. Keep that head down, no distractions." The words grated, laced with the earlier slight, but protocol bound her response. Then it broke. As the team stacked for entry, a recruit fumbled a flashbang simulator, the pop echoing prematurely. Chaos rippled, shouts, a momentary scramble. Kerrigan whirled, zeroing on Hargrove, who was covering the flank. "You, distracted again." He stormed over, seizing her by the arm this time, not the hair, but the intent was the same. A public correction bordering on assault. His grip twisted her toward the group, barking, "See this? Sloppy costs lives." The SS troopers in the stack froze, their faces hardening. Loyalty to the unit flaring against the outsider's overreach. Vasquez lowered the binoculars, the morning sun glinting off the lenses like a warning flare. She descended the platform in measured strides, the gravel crunching underfoot. Radio chatter spiked. "Control, this is Reed. Hold positions." The team halted, weapons at low ready, the air thick with unspoken tension. Rex, from his post, let out a low growl, Tate murmuring, "Easy, boy," his hand firm on the lead. The dog strained slightly, nostrils flaring at the spike of adrenaline. Kerrigan released Hargrove, turning to face the approaching colonel, his chest heaving. "Ma'am, just maintaining order. These exchanges need toughening." Vasquez stopped 5 paces away, her stance immovable, the weight of her rank settling like fog over the square. Witnesses encircled them, The platoon, the SAS cadre, even a maintenance crew pausing their work on a nearby Humvee. "Order, Sergeant, is not enforced by force against subordinates," she stated, voice projecting without elevation, especially not in view of the command. He straightened, recognition dawning slowly. The beret, the insignia. He'd seen her at briefings, but dismissed her as administrative. "With respect, ma'am, it's how we do it in the infantry. Builds resilience." His tone edged defensive, eyes darting to the onlookers, sensing the shift. Hargrove stood at parade rest nearby, her face impassive, but her fists clenched at her sides. Vasquez's mind catalogued the moment. Witnesses aplenty. Logs already rolling. The moral calculus sharpened. Obey the joint protocol and let it slide, or invoke the chain's higher purpose. She'd commanded ops where hesitation cost lives. Here, silence would erode trust. Resilience is earned through respect, not humiliation. Report to Major Reed immediately. This ends now. The order landed like a spent casing, final and unyielding. Kerrigan's jaw tightened, a flicker of defiance crossing his features. "Do you know who I am, Mom? 20 years in, Helmand vet. I don't take lessons from—" He cut off as Reed stepped forward, hand on his elbow. The platoon held breath, the wind whispering through the mock structures. Vasquez met his gaze, unflinching. "I know exactly who you are, Sergeant. The question is, do you know the consequences of crossing that line?" As Kerrigan was escorted away, the drill ground to a halt, the base's rhythm stuttering. Vasquez signaled the resumption, but the air hummed with the aftershock. In her office later, she'd review the reports, weigh the tribunal path. For now, the act of defiance hung, a catalyst in the rigid machinery of command, testing not just one man, but the institution's soul. Rex whined once more, as if echoing the unspoken vow. Loyalty demanded justice, silent and sure. The briefing room in the SAS headquarters building smelled of polished oak and stale coffee, the kind that had been brewing since Reveille. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the long table where Colonel Vasquez sat at the head, her posture straight as a rifle barrel. Major Reed placed a stack of incident reports before her, the pages crisp and annotated in his precise handwriting. Outside, the midday sun filtered through narrow windows, dappling the concrete walls with shadows that danced like distant patrols. The base had returned to its rhythm, trucks rumbling along the perimeter road, the faint bark of training dogs echoing from the kennels. But the morning's fracture lingered, a hairline stress in the foundation. Vasquez scanned the top sheet. Timestamps, witness statements from the platoon, even a preliminary note from the K-9 handler about Rex's agitation during the standoff. "Kerrigan's service record is solid," Reed said, settling into the chair beside her, his voice measured. "2 tours, commendations for Helmand. But it's a pattern in joint ops, overreach under stress." She nodded, her finger tracing the line detailing the physical contact. First the hair pull, then the arm grab. Hargrove's account was brief, professional. No embellishment, just facts. The lance corporal had requested no special handling, insisting on continuing the drill. That restraint spoke volumes. Vasquez recognized it as the quiet steel that bound special forces together. A knock at the door interrupted the review. Captain Ellis Thorne entered, saluting sharply before taking a seat. As the regiment's JAG liaison, Thorne was a lanky officer with a lawyer's keen eyes, his uniform devoid of the field creases that marked operators. "Ma'am, I've spoken with the infantry detachment commander. They're standing Kerrigan down pending review. No formal charges yet, but the witnesses are lining up. 8 from his platoon, 3 SAS observers." Vasquez leaned back, the chair creaking faintly under her. "And the media angle. Joint exercise means eyes from higher up." Thorne flipped open his tablet, displaying a secure email chain. "Brass in London is looped in. They want discretion, but if it escalates to tribunal, it'll ripple. Equality protocols are ironclad these days." The conversation turned procedural. Chain of command notifications, potential counseling versus disciplinary action. Vasquez weighed each option like ordnance loads. Duty demanded fairness, but morality pressed for more. She'd risen in an era when slights like Kerrigan's were shrugged off as barracks banter, Yet she'd seen them fester into unit fractures, eroding the trust that saved lives in the field. Hargrove wasn't just a subordinate. She represented the evolving face of the service, women proving their mettle in dives and raids, their loyalty as unyielding as any man's. To let this slide would undermine that progress, whispering that rank excused aggression. By afternoon, the reckoning unfolded in the base's central mess hall, a low-slung building where steel tables gleamed under harsh lights. Word had spread through the ranks like radio chatter, subtle nods in the chow line, sidelong glances during afternoon PT. Vasquez had called a unit stand-down, not a full assembly, but enough to address the platoon leaders and key witnesses. Soldiers filed in, boots echoing on the linoleum, the air thick with the scent of reheated stew and tension. Rex and Tate waited outside the door, the Malinois sitting alert, his handler stroking his flank to keep him steady. Dogs like him were barometers for unrest. Rex's calm now mirrored the enforced discipline within. Kerrigan stood at attention in the front row, his face a mask of stoic defiance, uniform still mud-flecked from the morning. Flanked by his detachment commander, a grizzled major from the Mercians, he avoided eye contact with Hargrove, who sat midway back, her posture impeccable. Vasquez entered last, the room snapping to silence as she took the podium, a simple wooden lectern scarred from years of briefings. "This morning's events require clarity," she began, her voice carrying without amplification, steady as a metronome. "Discipline is our shield. It demands respect at every level, from private to colonel. Actions that breach that, physical or otherwise, will not stand." Murmurs rippled, quickly quelled. She outlined the facts, the pulls, the grabs, the public corrections that veered into assault. No accusations flew. This was command, not courtroom drama. Kerrigan shifted slightly, his jaw set, but his eyes betrayed the calculation. 20 years' stake against one colonel's word. When she called for statements, hands rose sparingly. An SAS trooper spoke first, voice low and even. "Saw the sergeant lay hands on the corporal twice, ma'am. Uncalled for in training." Then a Mercian private, hesitant. "It looked rough, sir, ma'am, but he's usually fair." Hargrove went last, rising with measured grace. "I followed orders, ma'am. The contact was unnecessary but didn't impair the exercise." Her words hung, a testament to restraint, yet the red mark on her arm, now visible under rolled sleeves, spoke louder. Vasquez nodded to each, her gaze sweeping the room. The moral tension coiled tighter. Kerrigan's defiance wasn't just personal, it tested the institution's spine. "Sergeant Kerrigan," she addressed him directly, the room's breath collective. "Your intent was correction. Your method was error. Report to the adjutant's office at 1600 for formal review." He saluted, crisp but edged, muttering, "Understood, ma'am." As he exited with his commander, whispers erupted, loyalty fracturing along unit lines. Infantry closing ranks, while SSIs followed with quiet approval. Outside, as the group dispersed, Vasquez paused by the door. Tate approached with Rex, the dog's tail wagging once in recognition. "He picked up the stress early, ma'am," Tate said, patting the Malinois' head. "Nose doesn't lie." She allowed a faint smile, kneeling briefly to scratch Rex's ears, the wet warmth of his fur grounding her. Bonds like this, human to canine, officer to troop, were the unseen threads of command. Hargrove lingered nearby, saluting before heading to the armory. "Carry on, Lance Corporal," Vasquez replied, watching her go. The cost of integrity pressed in, careers at stake, reputations on the line, but reform demanded the stand. By evening, the base settled into twilight routines, lights flickering on in the barracks, the distant thump of a helicopter on approach. Vasquez returned to her office, the reports piling higher, each a ripple in the chain. Kerrigan's tribunal loomed, but so did the broader lesson. In rigid systems, one act of conscience could realign the whole. The wind off the Y carried a chill, whispering of changes yet to come, as Rex's distant bark echoed into the night, a reminder that true loyalty sniffed out injustice long before it broke the surface. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The adjutant's office was a Spartan affair, tucked into the rear of the SAS administration block, its walls lined with filing cabinets that hummed faintly from the air conditioning unit, straining against the summer humidity. Colonel Vasquez entered at precisely 1600 hours, her boots clicking softly on the tiled floor, the scent of fresh printer ink mingling with the ever-present trace of gun oil from the armory next door. Major Reed waited inside, standing beside the desk where Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale, the base adjutant, reviewed a preliminary dossier. Hale was a veteran administrator, his frame lean from desk duty, but his eyes sharp as a bayonet. Fair, unflinching, the kind of officer who balanced mercy with the letter of the law. Kerrigan arrived moments later, escorted by his detachment commander, Major Ellis Grant from the Mercians. The sergeant saluted at the threshold, his posture rigid, the mud from morning drills long scrubbed away, but the tension etched deeper into his features. "Sergeant Liam Kerrigan reporting as ordered, sir, ma'am." His voice held a clipped edge, the dual address a reluctant nod to Vasquez's presence. Grant positioned himself to Kerrigan's right, a silent buffer, his own salute crisp before taking a seat on the periphery. The room's single window overlooked the training fields, where afternoon PT echoed in distant shouts and the rhythmic thud of boots on turf. Vasquez took the chair opposite Hale, her movements deliberate, folding her hands on the table's edge. No pleasantries, protocol dictated efficiency. "Sergeant, this review addresses the incidents during this morning's joint exercise. We've statements from multiple witnesses confirming physical contact with Lance Corporal Hargrove, initially to her hair, then her arm. Your account." Hale slid a notepad forward, pen poised, the scratch of it the only initial sound beyond the low whir of a ceiling fan. Kerrigan stood at ease but unyielding, his gaze fixed on a point above Vasquez's shoulder. "Ma'am, it was corrective action. In the infantry, we push limits to build resilience. The corporal's hair was unsecured, field hazard. I demonstrated, nothing more. No intent to harm." His words flowed practiced, honed from years of after-action reports, but a faint sheen of sweat beaded at his temple, betraying the undercurrent. Grant interjected mildly. "The Major concurs it was in line with training norms, Colonel. Stressful environment, no lasting injury reported." Vasquez absorbed it, her expression neutral, the weight of command settling like the beret on her head. She'd reviewed Hargrove's medical log en route, minor bruising, no concussion, cleared for duty. But the moral ledger was heavier, public humiliation in front of mixed units, eroding the trust that Joint Ops relied on. "Resilience through example, Sergeant, not enforcement," she replied, voice level, echoing the morning's admonition. "The SAS integrates with your forces precisely because we share standards. Yours crossed into assault under the equality directives." Hale nodded. Jotting notes, the pen's rhythm a metronome to the unfolding tension. The questioning deepened, procedural as a range qualification. Reed presented timelines, 0612 for the first pull, 0745 for the second during the urban breach. Witness quotes followed. SAS trooper. Aggressive, unprofessional. Mercian private. Seemed excessive, ma'am. Kerrigan countered each, his defenses methodical. Fatigue from the rotation, the need to maintain momentum. "I've led platoons through worse, ma'am." Hellman didn't forgive sloppiness. But as Vasquez pressed on the public nature, the platoon watching, the ripple to morale, his posture shifted, a subtle lean forward, defiance flickering. "With respect, Colonel, do you know who I am? 20 years, medals from ops you'd clear in a briefing. This is a slap on the wrist for keeping standards." The room stilled, the words landing like a misfired round. Hale's pen paused. Reed's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Vasquez met Kerrigan's eyes directly, unflinching, the air thick with the faint ozone from the AC. "I know your record, Sergeant. Commendable service, but rank doesn't license overreach, nor does it shield from accountability." Grant cleared his throat, attempting to steer. "Perhaps a formal warning, counseling on protocols." But Vasquez held firm, signaling Hale. "Recommend suspension from joint duties pending full investigation. Tribunal if patterns emerge from his file." Kerrigan's face hardened, a vein pulsing at his temple, but he saluted and exited without retort. Grant following with a nod of strained diplomacy. The door clicked shut, leaving the officers in weighted silence. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the parade square where soldiers drilled in pairs, their forms precise against the fading light. Rex's bark carried from the kennels sharp and alerting, as if the Malinois sensed the base's pulse quickening. By 1700, the reckoning spread beyond the office walls. Word filtered through the non-commissioned ranks like steam from a field kettle, mess hall chatter turning to hushed debates over mugs of tea, the clink of spoons underscoring the gravity. Vasquez reconvened with Thorne in the corridor, the JAG officer clutching updated dispatches. "Higher commands involved, ma'am. Small Equality branch wants a brief by 2000. If it goes public, it'll hit the wires. Infantry sergeant disciplined in SAS exercise." Vasquez nodded, the institutional ripple clear, her regiment's reputation for precision now tested against perceptions of favoritism. Keep it factual. Focus on reform, not spectacle. The evening brief in the officers' mess unfolded under low-hanging lamps, the aroma of roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, a stark contrast to the tension. Vasquez addressed the cadre, platoon leaders from both units, maps of the exercise pinned to a whiteboard behind her. "This incident highlights integration challenges," she stated, pointer-tapping key points. "We train together to fight together. Breaches in conduct fracture that." Questions came measured. An SAS captain on protocol updates, a Mercian lieutenant probing Kerrigan's future. Hargrove attended, seated quietly at the rear, her presence a subtle anchor, bandage discreet on her arm, eyes forward. As the meeting adjourned, Vasquez lingered with Reed and Thorne, the room emptying to the scrape of chairs. "Kerrigan's pushing for a union rep," Thorne reported, scrolling his tablet. Claims gender bias in the response. The moral fault line widened, duty to the chain clashing with conscience for the wronged. Vasquez gazed out the window, where twilight painted the Wye Valley in deepening blues, the river's murmur faint through the glass. "Bias is in the act, not the correction. Proceed with the hearing," Reed affirmed, his loyalty a steady hum amid the storm. Night fell fully, the base's floodlights snapping on with a buzz, illuminating sentries pacing the wire. In her quarters, Vasquez reviewed final logs by desk lamp, the glow reflecting off her wedding band. Long absent, a reminder of sacrifices. Rex's handler had noted the dog's unease persisting, a canine echo of human strain. The cost mounted, Kerrigan's career teetering, Hargrove's resolve tested, the regiment's legacy on the line. Yet in the quiet, reform stirred, mandatory sensitivity modules for joint rotations, mentorship pairings across units. One defiance had cracked the facade, but Vasquez's integrity promised mending, forged in the disciplined silence of command. The wind off the river carried a chill through the open casement, whispering of reckonings yet to unfold, as the base settled into watchful repose. The first light of dawn filtered through the narrow blinds of the tribunal chamber, a nondescript room in the base's legal annex, its walls panelled in varnished pine that absorbed the low murmur of voices. Colonel Vasquez arrived early, her uniform immaculate, the faint creak of leather from her Sam Brown belt, the only sound as she took her seat at the officers' panel. The air carried the sterile tang of polished wood and fresh paper, undercut by the distant rumble of transport vehicles maneuvering on the apron outside. Major Reed entered behind her, carrying a leather-bound folder, his footsteps measured on the linoleum. "All parties notified, ma'am. Kerrigan's arrived with counsel." The tribunal was informal, preliminary per MOD guidelines, but its weight pressed like the humidity building before a summer squall. Lieutenant Colonel Hale presided from the center, flanked by two assessing officers, Captain Thorne from JAG and a neutral major from Joint Forces Command. Vasquez sat to Hale's right, her role as complainant and commander a delicate balance, her expression schooled to impartiality. She'd spent the night reviewing precedents, cases of overreach in training, the fine line between discipline and assault under the Armed Forces Act. Duty pulled one way, uphold the chain without favoritism, while conscience urged the other. Protect the integrity Hargrove embodied, the quiet progress of women in elite units. Kerrigan entered at 800 sharp, saluted the panel, and took his position at the respondents' table. His uniform was pressed, but shadows under his eyes spoke of a restless night. Beside him sat his advocate, a wiry staff sergeant from the infantry legal pool, notepad at the ready. Major Grant observed from the gallery, his presence a nod to unit solidarity, arms folded across his chest. Lance Corporal Hargrove waited in the antechamber, her testimony scheduled last. Vasquez had ensured her input remained procedural, no emotional appeals. Outside, the base stirred to life. Sentries changing shifts, the low whine of a canine transport idling near the kennels. Rex's handler Tate walking the Malinois along the fence line, the dog's nose questing at the morning dew. Hale cleared his throat, the gavel's tap unnecessary in the confined space. This hearing addresses allegations of inappropriate physical contact during joint training on 15th of July. Colonel Vasquez, as senior officer present, you initiate. She rose briefly, voice steady as a radio transmission. At 06:02, Sergeant Kerrigan seized Lance Corporal Hargrove's hair to correct her appearance, causing visible discomfort. A second instance at 07:45 during urban breach simulation involved gripping her arm, witnessed by 12 personnel. These actions disrupted unit cohesion and violated equality protocols. She sat, the folder sliding across to Hale, pages rustling like dry leaves. Kerrigan's advocate leaned forward. Ma'am, context matters. The exercise simulated high-threat environments. The sergeant's actions were motivational, not malicious, standard infantry practice to enforce field readiness. Kerrigan nodded once, his gaze fixed on the panel, the faint tick of his jaw betraying restraint. Thorne interjected, voice clipped. Precedents from 2018 Joint Ops Tribunal classify such contact as assault if unconsented. Witnesses confirm no prior warning. The exchange unfolded methodically, timelines dissected, statements cross-referenced. Reed presented digital logs from body cams, grainy footage capturing the pulls, the sergeant's hand lingering a beat too long, Hargrove's form holding steady amid the mud and wire. As the morning wore on, the moral tension coiled in the room's confines. Kerrigan testified second, standing tall, his words measured. 20 years in the ranks, ma'am. Led men through ambushes where hesitation killed. I saw a hazard, hair in the field, and addressed it. No different from tapping a soldier's helmet straight. But Vasquez noted the evasion. No acknowledgement of Hargrove's rank, her proven quals. The panel probed deeper, patterns in his file, a 2012 reprimand for excessive correction in basic training. Grant shifted in his seat, the gallery's silence heavy, broken only by the tick of a wall clock and the occasional crackle from a distant radio outside. Hargrove entered at 10:30, saluting before the stand, her arm bandage concealed under long sleeves, posture unbowed. Ma'am, she began in response to Hale's query. The contact was unexpected and forceful. It didn't prevent task completion, but it affected focus, drew eyes from the objective. Her voice held no tremor, eyes forward. The restraint a mirror to Vasquez's own early career. Questions followed. Did it impair performance? Escalate risk? She answered factually, the room absorbing her composure like a well-drilled squad. Kerrigan's eyes flicked to her once, a flash of calculation, then away. By noon recess, the air thickened with unspoken stakes. Vasquez stepped into the corridor for a brief consult with Reed, the linoleum cool underfoot, sunlight slanting through a high window to illuminate dust motes. He's digging in, Reed murmured, glancing at the door. Unions prepping an appeal on cultural differences between units. She nodded, the institutional machine grinding, reputations on the block, the SAS's elite sheen at risk if perceived as overzealous. Yet conscience anchored her. Silence on this would echo through deployments, whispering that loyalty bent to aggression. From the kennels, Rex's bark carried sharp, Tate's command cutting it short, a reminder of bonds unmarred by rank. The afternoon session resumed under fluorescent hum, testimony yielding to deliberation. Hale conferred with the panel in low tones, Thorne scrolling case law on his tablet. Findings. Actions constitute minor assault under Section 42, Hale announced finally, his tone even. Sergeant Kerrigan, 30-day suspension from duties, mandatory equality training, and reassignment to non-joint postings. No demotion, pending appeal. Kerrigan saluted, face impassive. but his advocate noted objections for the record. Grant rose to escort him out, the door's click echoing finality. Vasquez lingered as the room cleared, the weight lifting incrementally. Thorne approached, tablet extended. Emod satisfied. Discreet handling preserves ops tempo, but recommend unit-wide brief on protocols. She agreed, the reforms seed planted. Cross-training modules, emphasis on respect in mixed commands. Outside, the sun climbed higher, baking the parade square where afternoon drills recommenced, boots thudding in rhythm. Hargrove passed in the hall, saluting crisply. Vasquez returned it, a held gaze conveying the unspoken, integrity's quiet victory. As evening approached, the base's pulse steadied, the wise flow murmuring beyond the wire. Vasquez walked the perimeter with Reed, gravel crunching, the faint scent of river mist rising. Kerrigan's defiance had cracked the facade, but the tribunal's gavel mended it, legacy forged not in shouts, but in the disciplined pursuit of justice. Rex trotted nearby on lead, ears pricked, his loyalty a silent testament amid the evolving order. The wind shifted, carrying promise of clearer horizons, where command's true strength lay in upholding the vulnerable core. The late afternoon sun slanted across the parade square, turning the gravel to a mosaic of warm golds and lengthening shadows. Colonel Vasquez stood at the edge of the formation, her gloved hands clasped behind her back, watching as the mixed units concluded their debrief. The air hummed with the low chatter of after-action reviews, soldiers in sweat-dampened fatigues clustering around clipboards, voices clipped and professional, the faint metallic tang of spent brass lingering from a nearby range. Major Reed approached from the admin block, his stride purposeful, a fresh printout folded under his arm. Tribunal outcomes disseminated, ma'am. Kerrigan's en route to his unit for processing. No appeals filed yet. Vasquez nodded once, her gaze sweeping the ranks where Hargrove stood among her section, adjusting a radio harness with steady hands. The lance corporal's movements were precise, the faint outline of the bandage beneath her sleeve, a subtle reminder amid the uniformity. The morning's tension had ebbed into routine, but Vasquez felt its undercurrent, the way eyes lingered a beat longer on female officers, the subdued nods between infantry and SAS troopers. Institutional justice had spoken, yet the ripples demanded more than a gavel's echo. They called for quiet reform, the kind that wove through daily drills and briefings, strengthening the chain without fanfare. By 1800 hours, the base's central briefing theatre filled with the soft scrape of chairs and the rustle of notebooks. Vasquez had mandated a cross-unit session, not punitive but instructive, drawing platoon leaders, NCOs, and select witnesses from both regiments. The room's walls, panelled in muted green, absorbed the low hum of an overhead projector warming up, its fan whirring like distant rotor blades. Rex and his handler, Tate, waited in the corridor outside, the Malinois' paws clicking faintly on the tile, his presence a calming constant for those attuned to such bonds. Dogs like him bridged the unspoken, sensing fractures before words gave them form. Vasquez took the podium as the last arrivals settled, the assembly snapping to attention with a collective rustle. "At ease," she commanded, her voice carrying the measured cadence of countless ops briefs. The projector flickered to life, displaying a simple slide. Timelines from the exercise, anonymized but clear, points of contact marked in red, overlaid on protocol excerpts from the Armed Forces Act. This morning's events exposed a vulnerability in our integration, not in tactics, but in conduct. Discipline binds us, breaches weaken the whole. She paused, eyes meeting those in the front row. Kerrigan absent, but his shadow loomed in the infantry officers' stiff postures. Major Grant from the Mercians spoke first, rising with a nod. "Ma'am, the suspension's noted. My detachment's reviewing our training evals for similar lapses." His tone held respect, tempered by the sting of one of his own sidelined. Vasquez acknowledged him, advancing the slide to a matrix of reform measures. Mandatory modules on equality and field corrections, paired mentorships across units, simulations emphasizing verbal de-escalation. "Implementation starts next rotation," she stated. "SAS will lead, but all contribute. Loyalty isn't rank-bound, it's forged in mutual regard." Hargrove, seated midway, contributed a brief point on dive quals, how physical readiness demanded trust, not force, her words eliciting murmurs of agreement, a subtle shift in the room's air. As the session broke into discussion groups, Vasquez stepped aside with Reed and Thorne, the JAG officer's tablet glowing with follow-up queries from London. "Modi's green-lighting the modules," Thorne reported, voice low against the rising chatter. "But they're watching for backlash, infantry unions murmuring about elite overreach." Vasquez's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the moral calculus sharpening. Her stand had protected one, but risked widening divides. Yet conscience held firm. She'd mentored enough to know silence bred deeper wounds. Outside, Rex whined softly through the door, Tate murmuring a command, the dog's ears pricked at the undercurrents of resolve. Evening descended with the precision of a watch change, floodlights bathing the barracks in steady amber. Vasquez walked the officer's path to the mess, gravel crunching underfoot, the wise murmur a distant counterpoint to the base's settling hum. In the hall, soldiers queued for supper, trays clattering, the aroma of boiled cabbage and shepherd's pie wafting through steam vents. She paused at a table where Hargrove sat with 2 SAS troopers, their conversation halting as she approached. "Lance Corporal," Vasquez said, pulling out a chair uninvited, the wood scraping softly. "Your input today carried weight. How's the arm?" Hargrove met her gaze, fork midway to her mouth, then set it down. "Healing, ma'am. Cleared for full duties tomorrow." No elaboration, but the faint relaxation in her shoulders spoke volumes, the quiet gratitude of shared understanding. One trooper, a wiry sergeant with helmet patches on his sleeve, leaned in. "Whole platoon's buzzing about the reforms, Colonel. About time we synced on that." Vasquez allowed a nod, the exchange a microcosm of legacy, one incident sparking dialogue, eroding old barriers without fanfare. Kerrigan's defiance had tested the system. Her response was mending it, thread by disciplined thread. Later, in the dim glow of her office, Vasquez reviewed the session logs by desk lamp, the pages whispering under her fingers. Reed knocked and entered, placing a mug of tea beside her. Strong, no sugar, as per habit. "Kerrigan's packed for reassignment," he said, settling into the visitor's chair. "Heard he requested a transfer to training cadre. Wants to teach the protocols himself." A pause, the steam curling between them. Redemption? Vasquez considered it, the weight of careers balanced like ordnance. Possibly. But trust rebuilds slowly. The Major's loyalty shone in his silence, years of shared ops binding them tighter than any oath. As midnight neared, the base quieted to the rhythm of night watches, sentries' footsteps echoing faintly, the occasional bark from the kennels cutting the stillness. Vasquez stepped onto her quarters balcony, the cool river breeze tugging at her shirt, carrying the scent of damp moss and distant pine. Below, a lone figure, Tate with Rex, patrolled the wire, the Malinois' form a shadow in motion, nose to the ground. In that bond lay the purest lesson, loyalty unmarred by ego, sensing threats to the pack before they surfaced. Kerrigan's path diverged, but the regiment evolved, reform taking root in briefings and drills, Hargrove's resilience a beacon for those following. The moral tension eased into resolve, actions rippling outward, updated manuals circulated by dawn, cross-unit pairs forming for Sims. Vasquez's integrity had not shattered the chain but refined it, proving command's true strength in upholding the vulnerable. The stars wheeled overhead, the Y flowing eternal, a testament to quiet transformation amid rigid order. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Colonel Vasquez reach those who still believe in honor. The days following the tribunal blurred into a steady cadence of implementation, the base's rhythm adjusting like a well-oiled mechanism under Colonel Vasquez's watchful eye. Dawn patrols resumed with added layers, cross-unit pairings mandated for every rotation, infantry sergeants shadowing SAS handlers to learn the subtleties of verbal command over physical. The parade square, still bearing faint scars from the exercise's mud, echoed with modified drills. Obstacle courses now interspersed with scenario briefs on de-escalation, voices rising in measured discussion rather than barked corrections. Vasquez moved among them during morning inspections, her boots leaving precise imprints in the dew-kissed gravel, the faint chill of the Y clinging to her uniform like a reminder of vigilance. In the K9 kennels, where the air hung heavy with the scent of oiled leather and damp fur, reform took tangible form. Tate, Rex's handler, had been tapped to co-lead a new module, integrating K9 units into joint sensitivity training. The Malinois paced his run, ears flicking at the approach of Hargrove, who volunteered for the first session. "He's reading you already," Tate said, clipping the lead with a snap, his voice low and instructional. Hargrove knelt, extending a gloved hand. Rex sniffed, then leaned in, his wet nose brushing her palm, a silent affirmation of trust untainted by hierarchy. Vasquez observed from the fence line, Major Reed at her side, the Major's clipboard noting adaptations for mixed teams. "Dogs don't salute, ma'am," Reed murmured, a rare hint of dry humor breaking through. "But they enforce loyalty better than any order." Hargrove's role expanded organically, her SBS quals making her a natural mentor for the evolving protocols. By week's end, she'd paired with a Mercian Lance Corporal for urban sims, guiding him through breach entries with emphasis on clear signals. No grabs, no pulls, just the precision of hand gestures and radio calls. The young soldier, wide-eyed from basic, absorbed it without resistance, his earlier smirks from the incident day replaced by focused nods. "Feels cleaner this way, Corporal," he admitted post-run, wiping sweat from his brow as they cooled down near the mock structures. Hargrove's response was brief, professional. "It saves lives, carry it forward." Vasquez caught the exchange from the observation post, the sun glinting off her binoculars, a quiet swell of satisfaction tempering the ongoing administrative load. Kerrigan's reassignment to a training cadre in the Midlands arrived via secure dispatch, his departure unmarked save for a curt salute to Grant at the motor pool. The Major had pulled Vasquez aside, before loading the sergeant's kit into the transport, the engine idling with a low rumble. "He's taking the modules, ma'am. Requested instructor duty. Says it'll square his ledger." Grant's tone held no apology, just the pragmatism of command, his eyes reflecting the shared burden of units intertwined. Vasquez nodded, the wind tugging at the transport's canvas flap. "Redemption starts with accountability, Major. Ensure he teaches it true." As the vehicle pulled away, gravel spraying in its wake, she turned back to the base, the moral arc bending toward closure. Not forgiveness, but utility, the institution's way of weaving flaws into strength. The broader legacy unfolded in the officers' briefings, where Vasquez's influence rippled upward. Mod auditors arrived mid-month, their clipboards heavy with queries on the Hereford Protocol, the informal name now attached to the reforms. In the conference room, under the steady hum of the projector, she presented metrics. Incident reports down 15% in joint exercises, feedback surveys showing improved cohesion scores. Thorne flanked her, tablet aglow with endorsements from London. "Your stand set the template, Colonel," he said post-meeting, as the auditors departed in a staff car, tires crunching over the apron. "They're rolling it out to other bases. Quietly, of course." Vasquez allowed a measured exhale, the weight of scrutiny lifting incrementally, her gaze drifting to the window where Rex trotted on patrol, Tate's commands a faint underscore. Mentorship became the quiet engine of change. Vasquez initiated informal pairings, herself taking on a rotation of junior officers, Hargrove among them, for field reviews. One evening, as twilight settled over the Wye Valley, they walked the perimeter fence, the river's murmur blending with the rustle of leaves. "That day tested more than protocol, Lance Corporal," Vasquez said, her voice even against the cooling air. Hargrove matched her pace, boots sinking on the path. "It did, ma'am. Showed me commands about the unseen stands." No elaboration followed. Emotion emerged in the shared silence, the faint glow of barracks lights flickering to life. Rex joined them midway, off lead for the handler's trust exercise, circling once before heeling at Tate's whistle, a symbol of bonds reformed, instinctive and enduring. By month's end, the base had transformed subtly, its rigid hierarchy softened at the edges without losing edge. Joint exercises flowed smoother, radio chatter laced with affirmations rather than overrides, the chain of command fortified by mutual regard. Vasquez stood at her office window one dawn, coffee steaming in her mug, watching the assembly form under floodlights. Soldiers moved with renewed purpose, infantry integrating seamlessly with SAS precision, Hargrove at the fore of a mixed squad, her ponytail secured but unremarked. Kerrigan's absence was a lesson etched in policy, his potential return as instructor a bridge to broader equity. The institution learned through her integrity, ripples extending beyond Hereford to the shadowed ops where loyalty truly mattered. Vasquez's career, once whispered about in halls of tradition, now stood as testament. Moral courage wasn't defiance, but the disciplined choice to elevate the whole. In the quiet breath before reveille, as the wind carried the first calls from the kennels, the regiment emerged stronger, honor reclaimed, one principled stand at a time. In the end, true command lay not in the pull of rank, but in the steady hand that guided it toward justice, leaving a legacy as unyielding as the river carving its path through stone. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of Do You Know Who I Am? Fair soldier pulled her hair. Unaware she commanded the SAS in Hereford. See you in the next one.